What's up, y'all? That is the old classic Off to California. It was a request that came up on one of the socials, and I thought might as well do a long-form video on it because I've not really covered it on the channel before. And I'm always looking for an excuse to run some new hornpipes out there and to work some up into my own repertoire. So let's break down the basic melody here and see what we can do with it. You probably heard there were lots of triplets and all sorts of other things that we can work on. I'm going to start with just the basics here, and we'll try to keep it simple, and we'll break it down into chunks like I've been doing here lately. So here we go, the beginning of the A part. That's the first section there. Be able to get that, run that a few times if you need to, and then we'll carry on here with the second bit. Here we go. As is fairly common with these tunes, it's just the ending that changes. The first part's really the same as the beginning. So we'll play the whole A part all the way through, nice and slow, still nice, easy tempo. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. And of course that whole thing would repeat, and then we carry on with the B part. So we'll dive in there again, still just the first section here, we'll break it down into chunks, and then we'll put it all together at the end. The B part does start up in the second octave and spends a bit of time there, so be aware of anyone who does not care for shrill noises, but here we go. And good news, that's really all there is to the B part. The whole second half is a repeat of the second half of the A part, like so. So again, you've only really got one extra section to learn with the B part. So we'll put it all together just so it kind of makes sense in context. Here's the whole B part, then we'll run the whole tune. So here we go, just the B part first of all. 2, 3, 4. Hopefully that made sense there. Let's play the whole tune all the way through. Still nice and easy, but a little bit more of like a beginner session kind of tempo, right? So 2, 3, 4. Cool, hopefully clearly get through that okay. Run those sections if you need to. Go back and fill in any gaps that weren't super smooth and get it at a nice, easy tempo like that before we dive in with all the other fancy stuff. If you are digging this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit me with a like and a subscribe down below. They say it helps. I guess it makes a difference in getting the word out and such. Also, I have a deep dive video on my Patreon if you're interested in some of the more advanced stuff that we'll cover over there. Also tabs and sheet music and all that other good stuff. So if you're interested, feel free to check that out. But let's break down some ornaments on this, starting, of course, with the A part. So you'll notice I'm doing a lot of tonguing, first of all, to separate those notes. That's kind of a hornpipey sound, or at least my approach to it anyway. It needs to have a bit of a lift to it and a little bit of separation, so I try to kind of make that the bass line. Hopefully those things are complementing that bass line staccato-y sort of effect. Starting with the roll on that first note. And you can slide into it, particularly the first time through the tune. I kind of like to give it a bit of a rolling start. And then a cut on that second G, again trying to accent that heavy downbeat that we get with these hornpipe. You know, it's a dance tune after all, so we want to make sure we hopefully come back to that one pretty regularly. Same thing when we get to the highest note in the phrase. I'm kind of leaning into it to really make sure we get to that accented properly. And then a roll as well. Separation between those extra notes after that, to follow the roll. Sort of a balance between that legato and staccato effect. I've got a bit of a slidey legato bit. And then landing that phrase, I haven't really done anything else, kind of making my way down the scale there, but landing that phrase, I'm bouncing off that bottom D. Back into the roll again. Sliding that E on the top of that. Anytime you get to a change in direction, I guess, or a plateau or a valley, I want to signify that somehow. That's kind of my thought process. I want to accent it in some way. And then finishing that phrase, the hornpipes tend to have that bump, that's sort of that 1, 2, 3 kind of an ending. That's fairly common, I guess, among hornpipes. So a couple of slides there, really, you could end that phrase. But then as I come back to that G to finish, I'm doing that same bouncy thing I talked about with the E earlier, bouncing off that extra note to end the phrase. Starting with the slide in the B part, again accenting that highest note in the phrase. And I'll also come back to it with a cut, a bit of again, hopefully a bouncy approach, sliding the first one, cutting the second one, so change in feel. Sliding into that roll on E. That's one of my favorite things to do on the whistle. The E in particular has just got a bit of a weird characteristic. It's very muted, and it's got that slidey effect that only really happens there. That kind of dirty sound. So sliding into the roll. So a couple things happening there. So I'm mirroring that same slide followed by a cut thing that I did on the high G earlier to start the phrase. And then I got a cut on the B. Cut on the A as well. You could do that either way. I wouldn't do both necessarily, but changing up the accent is one of my favorite things to do too. It kind of just gives it a bit of a subtle but an interesting dynamic move. Could do a roll on the A instead, changing up the phrasing a little bit, so be aware of some of those options that you can try and see how it sounds, and be listening to how you're playing it, really. That's the main thing, I guess. See if it works, see if it doesn't. Then we come around to the end again, which is the same. Could find some interesting way to change up the end of that phrase to give it a little bit of a difference, I suppose, from the A part, but that's what I'm doing with this tune. Let me know what you guys think of it. It's a great classic hornpipe, hopefully one to add to your collection, or maybe you can find some things to tweak if you already do have this tune, but let me know what y'all think. Any suggestions? I'm happy to take a run at them. I'll see y'all in the next one. Cheers.